misconception by the public that a lot of prostitution has gone away. Now we have handheld technology, we have wireless, we have computers. They don't see them walking the streets anymore, so they don't think that there's actually that much prostitution anymore. It's not the case, it's more than ever.
All the years that I paid for sex, I had no idea that most of the women were trafficked. I could trace everything back to pornography.
We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago.
It's perceived as a victimless crime in the sense that a lot of people purchasing sex do not understand that the person in front of them is not a willing participant, and a lot of times don't know that this person is a minor.
There's no set path into prostitution. Girls are introduced to sex at a really early age. They're taught to sexualize, mimic, worship the perfect female body. Because parents don't think anything of the little image that pops up when their kid's listening to Katy Perry and she's naked on a cloud. Girls begin to think that that's normal. And it's everywhere. It's, album covers, magazines, ads, smartphones, sexting, access to porn, and everything on the internet. And after a while, seeing this again and again, girls begin to think that they do anything in order to attain that perfect female image. And that's when they're ready to be prostituted.
We know that sex trafficking, the age of entry, of recruitment, is around 14, 15 years old.
There's a lot of girls that were abused beforehand, but other common things are girls that are depressed, isolated, or have low self-esteem.
Kids who are suffering from self-esteem issues for whatever reason, who are lonely, who are looking for a father figure.
They are craving attention.
How someone carries themselves, whether their eyes are cast down.
We had contact with a reformed exploiter that said, quite frankly, when they come to me and I see that they got their head down, I got them.
There are many individuals trying to push back the darkness of prostitution. Summer Stephan is one of them.
This is a human rights issue. This is the #1 human rights issue in our country.
Methods of recruitment are insidious and all around us.
When we asked in our school focus groups where are kids being recruited, church came up more than once.
Schools are a very ripe area for recruiting. And once one girl is recruited and groomed and brainwashed, she is sent back into the school and she's the older girl that is now helping the trafficker to recruit younger girls. 20 out of 20 schools that were part of the research had human trafficking victims, had recruitment on their school ground. That's why, when we talk to schools, we tell them to make sure that they ask more questions about a girl feeling sick on a Friday, because they start their truancy on Friday and they return on Monday. House parties is the #1 thing we see. I'm going to a party. Parents don't ask any further questions often, and they should.
Recruiters can be pimps, small-time gangs, criminal syndicates, former victims, and even family members.
I know of this one parent that sold their own child into it in San Diego, California. The girl was 6 years old.
The U.S. State Department defines sex trafficking as a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or any such act in which the person induced to perform the act has not attained 18 years of age.
Some people walk into it, other people get kidnapped into it or grabbed up into it. It doesn't matter. It preys on people. It preys on the souls of people.
Came from a great family that went to church on Sundays and had a really close relationship with my grandparents. I had great friends. I was walking down the street in Escondido, right next to Bear Valley, by Orange Glen. I had no idea that people were after me, that they were following me. They drove me several hours away. They threw me down some stairs. I was so traumatized I blacked out. I had just turned 13.
Most boys in America are introduced to pornography before the age of 10.
A man's idea of what sex is nowadays, in this day and age that we live in, is strongly supported by pornography.
My dad kept a really large stack of porno magazines in the basement. If I could go back to age 9, I confront my dad. You know, why are you leaving this stuff out for me to get a hold of? You know, I'm sorry you went through horrible things as a child. You know, if you could just be strong enough to reach out to somebody, ask for help, you know, you could be a better father. You could be that better role model for me.
When I came to, I was like, where am I? I couldn't see anything. And I realized I was in this basement with that classic rectangular window.
This is the analogy that pimps will use. They say, we know how to break a girl, and it takes us about 2 weeks to do it.
They made me see like 30 different guys a day, 24 hours straight. And then they leave me for days.
For the most part, it is men that are buying and simply don't care and have no conscience or regard that this is a young person.
People ask me how a guy could just buy another person and not even wonder if she's doing it willfully or if she's underage or not. But when you buy sex, you don't think about those things. It's all about you know, what do I want? You know, what are my needs?
It was horrid. It was hopeless.
"2,000 prostituted women were studied over a 30-year period, and it was found that their mortality rates were 200 times greater than those of women with similar demographic profiles. 82% of prostituted women have been physically assaulted, 78% have been threatened with a weapon, 47 to 57% have been kidnapped, and 73 to 92% have been raped.
We know that they are at the highest risk of being murdered by a serial killer when they're being prostituted.
The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
I don't remember the exact age when I discovered pornography. I want to say kindergarten, maybe first grade, somewhere along that time. My desire grew and grew. I became hungrier and hungrier for sex. I had to do more extreme things to feel any pleasure at all. And I was fooling myself into thinking that I could stop.
And many men don't stop there. 14% of all men in America have bought or are currently buying women or children for sex.
He was into sexual massages, things like that, and I became curious about it when I decided that I wanted to try that. And one day I actually went to the massage parlor, and as I was pulling into the parking lot, I saw him coming out, and I just I sat there and cried. All I could really think about was that verse about the sins of the father passing on to the son.
When I was in the basement, the chain was bolted to the wall. The concrete was old and crumbling. After weeks and weeks of pulling, the chain broke free. I escaped. I left at night, and it was a terrible area. Meth addicts everywhere. I ran as far as I could, but I had no idea where I was. And I had nothing, no money or anything. All I had was this long shirt. Eventually, I went back home, and the next day, everyone was like, "Why did you do that? Where did you go?" I never told them what happened.
I knew it was wrong, okay, but I didn't know it was wrong at the same time because nobody told me that it was wrong. It wasn't talked about. A lot of stuff just wasn't talked about.
Dr. Amy Carpenter has researched and co-authored the most comprehensive study on human sex trafficking in San Diego.
It is a huge problem, and that we have to get a handle on. All of this starts in the household.
I was a Christian growing up, but I could remember being sent to the store by my dad with a note to buy his cigarettes. Every time I'd ask him about his addictions, "When are you gonna stop smoking, Dad?" He'd always flip it back on me. "When are you gonna stop biting your nails?" he never took responsibility for his own addictions. He had been raised by an alcoholic, but he never drank. He chose a different set of addictions, it seems like, and they later influenced me.
In 1975, one of the most violent criminals of the 20th century was arrested. He raped and murdered reportedly more than 100 women over the course of several years.
It's because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents where we regularly attended church, two Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't perfect.
Well, no, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. From time to time, we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature. The most damaging kinds of pornography, again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence. Because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
When you look at porn, there's no conversation. There's no context. There's no true interaction. And I was really nervous growing up, being around girls when I was growing up. And then when I started going to bars, the women weren't acting like they were in the movies. Okay, it wasn't like you just talk to them for 10 seconds and then they take their clothes off. All right, that's not how it was. So it confused me in a sense. And that really took an effect on my relationships because I didn't know how to talk to women.
And it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality is that once you become addicted to it, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far, where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
I started college in San Diego, and that's when I really started getting into sexual massages, and that went on for years.
My parents got divorced, and it was around that time when I found out that he wasn't my real dad. My mom was wasted all the time and messed up on Percocet and prescription pills. She wouldn't supply anything that I needed, like food or clothing. And I tried getting her to sign a work permit so I could get a job, but she wouldn't do it. I started selling drugs for this gang. And not long after that, a rival cartel kidnapped me and put me on a ship. We were in Port Ensenada.
American girls are commonly taken across the border into Mexico.
The ship was heading to Italy.
The reverse trafficking of girls from America through Mexico to Europe and the Middle East is a common practice and is a reversal of the Atlantic slave trade of the 1600s.
The drug shipments were going out like 3 times a week, and they'd put girls with the drugs. There were a few black girls Mostly whitish though, but a mixture of all races. I know of 7 girls that were on the ship. You're lucky if you survive the trip because you're at the disposal of the crew and are used like incentives or rewards.
Cartels in Mexico control human trafficking from their ports of entry to various destinations in Europe.
Many terrorist groups use girls as a revenue stream. This list includes Boko Haram, the deadliest terrorist organization in the world, which has sworn allegiance to ISIS.
The original gang that I was selling drugs for came and they killed everyone on the ship, including the girls.
We are on the FBI's top 13 cities for child prostitution. This is an international problem.
It's absolutely reasonable that kids in a nice neighborhood like Encinitas or Del Mar or La Jolla could be kidnapped and shipped off overseas. Actually, more so in those areas.
Our sex trafficking victims are a good 80% domestic girls, U.S. girls born and bred and have gone to all our schools here locally, have been raised here locally. They're mostly domestic girls.
A common question is, how does a boy raised in America grow up to be someone who buys and enslaves domestic girls? Pornography rewires the brain. Recent studies show that someone who uses porn has almost identical brain activity to a drug addict.
It's like any addiction. When I was 13, 14, around that age, I was pretty much looking at porn every day, and I knew it was wrong. And you know, when I would finish, there was always that overwhelming sense of guilt, asking God, why am I doing this? Ultimately, by age 18 or 19, those feelings that I had, those feelings of guilt, they pretty much disappeared. They went away. So back in high school, my sports team took a trip to Vancouver, and my best friend, he knew exactly where to go as far as strip clubs that they wouldn't even check ID. So that's where I actually bought my first prostitute. After that, anytime I had extra money, I would just go to one of those places.
I started getting drunk and running around and doing crazy stuff. I stole my stepdad's truck a few times and he found out, and they sent me off to boarding school in a 2-year program. But I was really stubborn, so it took me like twice as long. But I graduated and went back home when I was 17. My mom was still messed up on prescription pain medication all the time and was constantly bringing home guys that were like just a couple years older than me. They'd have sex with her and then she'd pass out and they'd come upstairs and try to have sex with me. So I ran away again. I was like, I'm already putting you to bed and helping you throw up. Like, I don't need this. My parents sent me back to boarding school and I literally bawled my eyes out because I was so happy. Because I had been through the program before, they made me a mentor for at-risk kids. I loved it. And when I turned 18, I could legally leave, but I chose to stay because that was more of a family than my own family was. I started going to school for a trade and really felt like I was getting my life back on track. I made friends, but started selling and doing cocaine and partying and just getting back into that lifestyle. Because I dropped out of school, my family wasn't providing anything for me. So I'm working this part-time job without a car, and you can't get to 2 places on time. So I couldn't afford anything. So I went to my friend who was a stripper and involved in escorting, and I said, I need a way to make money. I got to get myself back on my feet, and this was the only way I knew how.
I've got contacts that this has happened to. They said they've engaged in this for a meal, you know, because they were cold and hungry.
When I had sex for the first few times anyway, I kind of expected that would eliminate my porn usage. But I felt like sex was fulfilling one desire and porn was fulfilling a completely different desire. And I felt like they fed each other. One never really eliminated the other. Pornography is absolutely what brought me to the point where I felt comfortable buying another person. Okay, porn totally transformed me. And if you're at the point where you're thinking of a woman as something that only exists for sex, you're right on the edge of buying a prostitute.
Their customers show them pornography in order to show them what they want. So what that tells us is that there's a demand side gateway, that pornography might serve as a demand side gateway. In other words, people start there, but they end up making the decision to purchase an actual human being.
They don't think about the other side of the coin here. They don't think about the fact that there's women under duress that they're preying upon.
So I got back into it, and I started working for these 2 guys. I was supposed to be an escort, but it turned into prostitution. In escorting, you're supposed to be able to leave if you want to, and it's not supposed to be violent. They forced some girls into it, but I volunteered. And then I realized these guys were psycho, and I wanted out.
And we found that 80% of pimps were affiliated with a gang.
With human trafficking becoming the second largest criminal industry, the second most profitable industry in the United States and right here in San Diego, gangs have increased their involvement with it because of that profit.
In the U.S., 68% of all prostituted women meet the criteria for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. The PTSD rate for military combat veterans is 24%.
There are a million reasons why they stay. They stay because of emotional manipulation, drugs.
I have actually a close friend that was from a very, very wealthy family that was recruited right outside of her high school. And because of that heroin addiction, he used that against her to become her pimp.
They'll pull up pictures of your family on Facebook and tell you that if you try to leave, they'll hurt them.
If they're trying to protect somebody at home from being beaten or killed, which traffickers often do sometimes, go out there and sell yourself, or I'm going to jack up your mom or your baby or whatever.
Initially, it's all about the love and seduction. But when they realize that they've been had, that this isn't really what they signed up for, that's when the abuse comes out. And that's when they're told, well, it's too late.
They would kill girls in front of us to use as examples if we didn't listen. I experienced it once firsthand, but I know that it happened at least 3 times. I was 20. We were all staying in the same hotel. And these two girls ran away after having worked a full day and didn't pay the guys. So they were obviously pissed. And so the guys were like, this is what's going to happen to you if you try to do the same. And so they just shot her. This isn't just in the ghetto. In the nice areas, you don't expect it because it's just a bunch of old, rich, retired people.
As parents worry so much about the stranger that's going to jump out of the bushes and kidnap their child, the real stranger is the one that's coming through their phone. So what that does is it makes every socioeconomic segment and every neighborhood subject to this threat.
But what we found is that victims are living and working, being forced to work in every city in San Diego County and in both very wealthy and very poor neighborhoods.
But remember, this is a transitory crime, meaning your product, which is unfortunately a human being with a soul, is being moved from place to place. So it really doesn't matter where the young girl comes from because she could be exploited anywhere in our county or across the state or country.
And we saw politicians and law enforcement. Military is huge, like 80% of who I saw, and from all 4 branches. Half were officers, and this one guy I saw like for a couple of years, a couple times a month.
For so long as we accept it and we think this is okay behavior, so long as they pay a fair price, then it's fine. You know, the person is willing, it's a victimless crime. It's going to continue and it's going to cross every segment of society.
I was living at home with my mom when these guys would come and pick me up from my house. They'd come get me at like 9 a.m. and I wouldn't get home until 4 the next morning. I was seeing like 15 guys a day. And it was abusive and aggressive. I got beat a lot. I wanted to get my life back on track, so I disappeared. And to this day, they're still looking for me.
So I thought that that getting married would solve everything. Met a great girl. Told God, I'm not gonna pay for prostitutes anymore. And that lasted about a month. It didn't stop when I started dating. It didn't stop when I got married. And it didn't stop when I had kids. The addiction had become a part of my personality, and it affected my marriage significantly. I wasn't there for my wife emotionally. I wasn't emotionally there for my kids. As far as what I actually spent on prostitutes and sex over my lifetime, a conservative amount would be at least $300,000. The way I hid that was using credit cards, charging my credit cards, and it got to the point where I was in a position I had to sell our belongings just to make ends meet. I had become this selfish jerk that only cared about myself. And I just became numb.
There are a lot of good men out there that are engaging in this activity that don't mean any harm. They don't mean any harm. They're just looking for a human interaction that they don't know how to get. There's a large population seeking the girlfriend effect. So the girlfriend effect is quite literally that. There's a buyer that goes online, looks for a provider, and that provider is supposed to behave as though it's his actual girlfriend. They seek kissing, they seek actual dating activity, they go out. And then when they come home, the end game is the sex. If I can treat you like my girlfriend, I don't have to call it prostitution.
For most of them, their intent is not to buy a young person. Their intent is to buy sex, but they don't care if it's a young person.
I went back to the trade school and I was a month away from graduating, but my school wouldn't transfer my units. So I was going to have to either start over or pay a ton of money. So I left school again, came back to San Diego, and felt like a complete failure. Started doing the same things and running around in the circle again. Started back in the business again, this time with a third guy, but he was really catering to whatever I needed. It's basically policy for a pimp to make you have sex with him in order to work for him. And they make you do whatever sexual thing they want. But this one didn't. He never robbed me or hit me. It was like paradise for the situation. Usually the pimps try to build like a boyfriend relationship, and they make you think that you're their girlfriend, and then they turn on you.
When it starts, sometimes it takes one day, sometimes it takes 3 months of grooming. We've seen the whole gamut. This older male then says, can you please do this? Can you do this sexual favor for my friend this one time? Then we can pay the bills and we can run off and be happy together in Las Vegas.
So I was like, finally, a nice pimp. I really stepped it up. All of the guys that I saw when I was a prostitute watched porn a lot, like 100% of them probably. I know because they told me. There were like maybe 2 guys during my entire career that didn't, or they lied about it.
I knew tons of guys who paid for sex.
There are no resources in our detention facilities, in our jails for formers, former pimps, former gang members, former anything, who want to get out of the life.
I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this.
It was always, and it is always, related to porn. You don't buy prostitutes if you don't watch porn.
But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
I did a couple jobs where I got paid 10 grand to do a video for an hour, but you don't get any choice in what you do. You just have to do what they say. Everyone in porn is on drugs, otherwise you'd go insane. They give you this contract that says you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, but in the middle of the shoot, they do something that you're not comfortable with, and you don't have any choice in it.
Traffickers force girls to engage in pornography as a way of psychologically controlling them.
You could charge more if you let them take pictures or video, but that's dangerous because then they could sell it and hold it over your head. Like they would sell it to a company or something, and you would be at everyone's disposal. I never did that, but I know some girls that did, and it never ended well.
What it ends up being is a life of disease, of a much higher risk of AIDS, syphilis, of all sorts of infectious diseases.
Around 70% of girls in the business get STDs, and about half of those are permanent. I know some girls that got AIDS and they didn't use a condom. They didn't care because you could charge more for doing it without the condom. They didn't take their safety into consideration.
The average death rate for them, if they continue in this very risky, very tough lifestyle, is about 34 years old.
Girls get pregnant all the time. In escorting, I know of a couple girls that kept it. The clients usually have families, so the girls would keep it and use it to blackmail in order to keep it secret. Like, guys would pay $3,000 a month just to keep it discreet. And some girls even have joint accounts with the guys. If the girl works for the cartel, she usually keeps it and raises it, but the cartel owns it. If it's a boy, by the age of 8 or so, he goes into selling or manufacturing drugs. And if it's a girl, after her first period, she goes into prostitution. One day I started thinking about how this isn't what God wanted from my life. How I didn't want to do this forever. I didn't even want to do it in the first place.
I needed a way out. I remember sitting in church, talking to God, saying, I don't want this anymore.
Jeremy was approaching rock bottom.
I'll do whatever it takes. And this was the first time that I committed to that. And within about a month, something really big happened.
I just did it because in my mind, I felt like it was the only way to survive. When I finally decided to get out, it was just a moment, and I was like, God, this isn't who I want to be. Why is this the only option that's coming up when I keep trying to do everything right? And I keep trying to quit. I'm reading the Bible every day, and I'm trying to build up my relationship with God and do everything right, and it just keeps getting worse.
I always knew it wasn't right, but I never thought about it being illegal.
Buying people is morally wrong and is also legally wrong.
Until I got arrested in a sting for buying a prostitute. My wife had to bail me out, and at that point I decided to confess everything to her. 15 years worth of stuff, even before we met. Everything, I told her everything. And she knew I was sick. She knew it. She knew something wasn't right with me. Something that I suppressed through all of this was the fact that I had been molested as a child. And I'm not using that as an excuse, but I can definitely see how that affected the course of my life.
When I was 10 or 11, the man who I thought was my dad brought home his nephew to live with us. And he raped me. He was 13. That was my first encounter. He made me write this note that said that I wanted it, and told me that if I told anybody about it, he'd kill my family, or me. I eventually told my mom about it, and she said, "Do you even know what rape is? I don't think that happened to you." I felt betrayed that this person that my family brought to live with us had hurt me, and my mom didn't even believe me. And it was at that moment where I thought, all right, I'm going to take care of myself because I can't trust anyone.
There are tens of thousands of children being commercially exploited for sex. The demand is furthered by the shocking numbers of child prostitution and molestation in our country. Pimps often search out places where young girls congregate or apply for work.
Trolley stops or bus stops, and when they do that, they're typically looking for homeless children or runaways, kids who look vulnerable, look lonely.
A girl within 2 minutes at the trolley station having run away from home, a guy comes along, "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be out on the street alone. Let me take you to my sister's house." Of course, that didn't turn out to be the sister's house.
Most runaways are solicited for survival sex within the first 24 to 48 hours of being on the streets.
We know as a society that children can't consent to sex, but for some reason, criminal buyers think that if they pay for it, that makes it okay.
Traffickers have been known to make child sex trafficking victims wear makeup, clothes, and even ingest drugs to appear older.
Does anyone really think that this is what she wants to do? That she woke up one day and said, you know, my life's dream is to be used every night by different strangers for money that I will never see, that is going to go to my trafficker. When we first learned in 2003 that San Diego was on the FBI's top 13 cities for high-intensity child prostitution, we immediately knew that that means that we have sex trafficking.
But this problem is not unique to San Diego.
This is a national problem.
The FBI's list of highest intensity child prostitution includes cities all over America. They are Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Dallas, Detroit, Tampa, Miami, Chicago, San Francisco, San Diego, New York, Washington, D.C., Las Vegas, and St. Louis. It does not stop there. Sex trafficking is on the rise, and it occurs in all 50 states. Websites like Craigslist or Backpage.com, a site where huge numbers of prostitution transactions occur.
Backpage, Redbook.com, Humaniplex,
have landing pages for cities with less than 40,000 people. Many people do not realize that prostitution is illegal, or they treat it like a minor misstep, like jaywalking.
That's perpetrating slavery. You're buying a person. It's not a chocolate bar. It's not a suit. It's actually a human being. That human being did not make a choice.
when I was going through the court-mandated rehab and all the trials and all that stuff, it was really, really hard for me. And my wife actually found a recovery group for me to join. I went and told the group leader my story, and surprisingly to me, he said, come join us, you'll fit right in. And that at that moment, that was the first feeling of hope that I had, because I knew I wasn't alone.
One moment I saw an opportunity and everything just fell into place. The man I was working for decided to leave the business, and it was the answer to what I had been praying for. I didn't want to work for anybody else because I'm tired of running in circles, and I want to do things legal and right. I got out.
It all starts with every guy being completely real and honest with himself, all right? And, you know, really realizing that he's only 2 steps away from becoming the problem. At the same time, he's also only 2 steps away from becoming the solution.
We have to address the pornography issue.
The word pornography has Greek roots. It's a combination of words porneia and graphein. Porneia means slave prostitution, and graphein means drawing. So pornography is nothing more than an image of slave prostitution.
President Lincoln thought he ended slavery, but it did not end.
President Abraham Lincoln said that slavery is founded in the selfishness of man's nature, opposition to it in his love of justice. Today, more than 150 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and freed over 3 million slaves, there are an estimated 27 million modern-day slaves of human and sex trafficking worldwide. That's equivalent to the entire state of Texas.
It was the perfect opportunity to leave, so I did. And I haven't been back to that lifestyle since I was 21. Definitely thought about it.
Through God's help, I have been able to come to the point where much too late, but better late than never, feel the hurt and the pain that I am responsible for. Yes, absolutely. In the past few days, myself and a number of investigators have been talking about unsolved cases, murders that I was involved in. And it's hard to talk about all these years later because it revives in me all those terrible feelings and those thoughts that I have steadfastly and diligently dealt with, and I think successfully, with the love of God. And yet it's reopened that, and I felt the pain and I felt the horror again of all that. And I can only hope that those who I have harmed, and those who I've caused so much grief, even if they don't believe my expression of sorrow and remorse, will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence.
If you have problems with prostitution, pornography, sex, whatever it may be. I've been there. And I couldn't do anything until I gave God the permission to take over my life. For me, that was the first step. And if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling like there's no way out, I'm here to tell you that there is hope. And you may feel like you're at the bottom, but there's a way out.
There are ways back from dehumanization.
Dark, he sees you hiding behind all their mistakes. They don't have to keep you. Grace can take all of the blame. He calls you by name. Cause you've got nothing left to give. You've got nothing left to give. Cause they keep taking like you're made of it. So give him all the fragments of your broken heart. The watches of bring life through all the rain of tears you've cried, and watches that dissolve the darkness of the past. Cause you were made to live far beyond these walls that caged you in. So run free, run free. darkest night, with no way out, with no way out. You were lost in the dark of the night, in the darkest night, with no way out, with no way out. Found you in the dark of the night, let you out with the light. There's one way out.